All right, let's talk about one of the most persistent and frankly damaging myths out there. This whole idea of natural talent. Now, this isn't about motivation. We're here to get into the mental mechanics to really understand how growth and mastery actually get built. So let's dive in.
So here's the big question, right? Why is it that some people just seem to consistently grow, while others, who are just as smart, just as hardworking, end up stalling out? It's a super frustrating paradox. You see these brilliant people hit a wall, and then you see others who, maybe started a bit slower, but they just keep getting better. The answer, it turns out, isn't in our genes or some kind of innate gift. It's all about misinterpreting the signals of growth.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with how we even tell the story of talent in the first place. Then we'll look at the real, predictable curves of mastery and why so many of us confuse friction with failure. We'll touch on the cost of that mistake, what we can call the plateau of potential, and then the simple shift in perspective that changes everything. And we'll wrap up by reflecting on your own growth.
All right, section 1. Let's dig into this idea of the retrospective talent story. It's a really counterintuitive truth about how we see success.
Here's the thing about natural talent. It's almost never something we see happening in the moment. It's a story we tell ourselves after the fact. Think about it. We see someone achieve something amazing, and what do? We work backward. We create a story to explain it away. We look at that polished, final result, the successful founder, the incredible musician, and we label it as proof of some innate ability. And in doing that, we totally ignore the messy, the uncertain, frankly, the ugly process that actually got them there.
And this contrast really lays it all out, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got the myth we tell, innate ability, genetic luck, this idea of effortless success. But the reality, the thing we can actually observe when we look closely, it's a totally different story. It's about early exposure, just getting a head start. It's about years, literally years of iteration, of trial and error. And it's about a ton of invisible struggle that happens when no one is watching. We see a head start, and we call it a genetic gift. It's just a mislabeling.
So, if it's not talent, then what's the actual pattern here? How does skill really get built over time? Well, it turns out that mastery follows this surprisingly predictable and, let's be honest, often really frustrating path. And this is true across any domain, whether you're learning to code, or lead a team, or play the guitar.
So this is what the journey really looks like. It almost always kicks off with this amazing burst of progress. That's the rapid start. It feels fast, it's exciting. But then you hit it, the long plateau. And this is the make or break phase. It's where your progress just seems to grind to a halt, and it is so frustrating. You feel like you're putting in the work but getting nothing back. But here's the crucial part. That plateau is not the end. It's a transition. It's the quiet period right before a breakthrough, where all that work suddenly clicks into place and you make this huge nonlinear leap in your ability. And then the whole cycle just starts over, but at a higher level.
And that brings us to this key idea. What we often call talent is really just a label for someone who had the grit to stick it out through that long, boring middle, that frustrating plateau. They didn't have some secret sauce. They just kept going, kept iterating, long after the initial rush of enthusiasm wore off and others had given up.
Okay, so why? Why do so many smart, capable people quit right there on that plateau? Well, it all comes down to this really fundamental mental mistake. We confuse the feeling of friction with the reality of failure. Let's define this term, cognitive friction. It's that feeling of mental strain, right? The confusion, the difficulty you feel when you're really pushing the edges of what you know. But here's the absolute key. That discomfort is not a warning sign that you're failing. It's the opposite. It is the physical sensation of your brain building new connections, of it rewiring itself. That friction is, quite literally, what growth feels like.
And yet, what's the story we tell ourselves when we feel that friction? It's almost always something like this, isn't it? This feels impossible. I'm just not cut out for this. We take the difficulty not as part of the process, but as a final judgment on our ability. We think the struggle means we don't have it. But the truth is, the struggle is it.
And this misunderstanding, it has a huge cost. It creates what you might call the plateau of potential. It's the self-imposed ceiling that stops so many intelligent, driven people from ever finding out what they're truly capable of.
This really just lays out the two different paths people take. You have the potential learner. They hit that plateau, they feel the friction, and they see it as a dead end, their limit. So they stall out or they quit, and all that potential goes untapped. But then you have the builder. They see the exact same plateau, but they understand the pattern. They see it not as a wall, but as a necessary transition. They lean into that friction, and because they do, they come out the other side with real, durable, flexible skills.
And that brings us to the shift. The simple but incredibly powerful change in perspective that separates the people who stall from the ones who just keep growing. And it's not about working harder. It's about seeing the hard work in a completely different light.
Okay, if you take one thing away from this whole explainer, let it be this. Friction is not a signal of your limit, it is the signal of your growth. I'm going to say that again. Friction is not a signal of your limit, it's the signal that you are in the middle of growing. That feeling of struggle you instinctively want to run from, that is the evidence that adaptation is happening. When it feels hard, when you're confused, when you feel slow, that is the exact moment your capacity is expanding. Friction isn't the roadblock, it's the road.
So, let's make this real for you. We're not going to finish up with a simple checklist of tactics. Instead, I want to leave you with 3 questions. They're designed to help you recalibrate your own mental model based on what we've just talked about. First question for you. Where have you mistaken a convenient story for a cause? Think about your own life, your own career. Where have you told yourself, oh, I just don't have the talent for that? Was it really a lack of some innate gift? Or were you just creating a narrative to explain away the friction you felt when things got tough at the beginning?
Okay, number 2. What current plateau are you misinterpreting as a permanent ceiling? Think about right now. Is there some area where you just feel stuck, where it feels like you've stopped making progress? Take a hard look at that plateau. Are you seeing it as a wall, as the final word on how good you can get? Or can you start to reframe it as just the boring, necessary middle before your next breakthrough?
And finally, this is maybe the most powerful question of all. Which feeling of friction that you're experiencing right now is actually a sign of adaptation in progress? Think about what feels hard for you this week. That specific feeling of discomfort, of struggle, in your work or in your learning. What if it's not a signal to stop? What if it's actually the very signal that your brain is doing the hard work of adapting and growing? That is the feeling to lean into.